In this video, you're going to deploy your Node app live to the web using Heroku. By the end, you'll have a URL you can give anybody and they'll be able to go to that URL in their browser to view the application. We're going to do this via Heroku. Heroku is a website. It's a web app for managing web applications that are hosted in the cloud. It's a really great service. They make it almost effortless to create new apps, deploy your apps, update apps, and add cool add-ons. Things like logging and error tracking, all of that is built in. Now, Heroku, like GitHub, does not require a credit card to sign up, and there is a free tier which we'll be using. They have paid plans for just about everything, but we can get away with the free tier for everything we'll be doing in this course. To kick things off, we're going to open up the browser and go to Heroku.com. Here, we can go ahead and sign up for a new account. Take a quick moment to either log into your existing one or sign up for a new one. I'm going to go ahead and log in to show you the dashboard. I want you to pause the video, go through that sign up process, and once you see the dashboard, you can go ahead and click play. Now, your dashboard is going to look something like this, although there might be a greeting telling you to create a new application. You can go ahead and ignore that. I have a bunch of apps. You won't have these. That is perfectly fine. Just take a moment to create your account, log in, and when you see something like this, go ahead and click play. At this point, I'm going to assume that you have a Heroku account and that you were able to log in. And this is great because the next thing we're going to do is install the Heroku command line tools. This is going to let us create apps, deploy apps, open apps, and do all sorts of really cool stuff from the terminal without having to come into the web app. That's going to save us time and make development a lot easier. We can grab that download by going to toolbelt.heroku.com. Here we're able to grab the installer for whatever platform you happen to be running on. I'm going to go ahead and grab mine for Mac. I'm going to start the download. It's a really small download, so it should happen pretty quickly. Once it's done, we can go ahead and run through the process. This is a simple installer where you just click next. There is no need to customize anything. You don't have to enter any specific information about your Heroku account. I'm going to go ahead and complete the installer, and all this really is going to do is give us a new command from the terminal that we can execute. And before we can do that, we do have to log in locally in the terminal. And that's exactly what we're going to do next. So take a moment to pause the video and get to this step where the installation was completed successfully. When you're done, you can go ahead and click play. By now, I'm going to assume that you have installed the Heroku toolbelt for your operating system. Now, what I'd like you to do is go ahead and start up the terminal. If you already have it running, you might need to restart it in order for your operating system to recognize the new command. You can test that it got installed properly by running Heroku-help. When you run this command, you're going to see that it's installing the CLI for the first time, and then you're going to get all of the help information. This will tell you what commands you have access to and exactly how they work. Now, we are going to need to log into the Heroku account locally. This process is pretty simple. Here we have all of the commands available, and one of them happens to be login. We can run Heroku login just like this to start the process. I'm going to go ahead and run the login command, and now we just use the email and password that we had set up before. I'm going to type in my email. Then I'm going to go ahead and type my password. Typing is hidden because it's secure. And when I do that, you see logged in as Andrew Joseph Mead shows up, and this is fantastic. And now we're logged in and we're able to successfully communicate between our machine's command line and the Heroku servers. This means we can get started creating and deploying applications. Next up, I'm going to use the clear command to clear the terminal output, and now we're going to go ahead and get our SSH key on Heroku. Kind of like what we did with GitHub, only this time we can do it via the command line, so it's going to be a lot easier. In order to add our local keys to Heroku, we're going to run Heroku space keys : add. This is going to scan our SSH directory and add the key up. Here you can see it found a key, the ID RSA pub file. Would you like to upload it to Heroku? Yes, I would. Excellent. Now we have our key uploaded. That is all it took, much easier than it was to configure with GitHub. From here, we can use the Heroku keys command to print all of the keys currently on our account, and we can always go ahead and remove them using Heroku keys : remove, followed by the email related to that key. In this case, we're going to keep the Heroku key that we have. Next up, we can test our connection using SSH with the v flag get at Heroku.com. This is going to communicate with the Heroku servers, and right here you can see it's asking that same question. Authenticity of the host can't be established. Do you want to continue? Yes. Now, when you run that command, you're going to get a lot of cryptic output. What you're looking for is authentication succeeded and then in parentheses public key. If things did not go well, you're going to see the permission denied message with public key in parentheses. In this case, the authentication was successful, which means we are good to go. I'm going to go ahead and run clear one more time, clearing the terminal output. Now we can turn our attention towards the application code, because before we can deploy to Heroku, we are going to need to make 2 changes to the code. These are things that Heroku expects your app to have in place in order to run properly, because Heroku does a lot of things automatically, which means you have to have some basic stuff set up for Heroku to work. Now I promise it's not too complex, some really simple changes, a couple one-liners. First up, in server.js, down at the very bottom of the file, we have the port our app listens to statically coded inside of server.js. We need to make this dynamic, which means we want to use a variable. We're going to be using an environment variable that Heroku is going to set. Heroku will tell your app which port to use, because that port will change as you deploy your app, which means that we're going to be using that environment variable so we don't have to swap out our code every time we want to deploy. That would be a super big pain and would actually be impossible. With environment variables, Heroku can set a variable on the operating system. Your Node app can read that variable and it can use it as the port. Now, all machines have environment variables. You can actually view the ones on your machine by running env on Linux or OS X, or the set command on Windows. And what you're going to get when you do that is a really long list of key value pairs. And this is all environment variables are. Here we have a log name environment variable set to Andrew. I have a home environment variable set to my home directory, all sorts of environment variables throughout my operating system. One of these that Heroku is going to set is called port, which means we need to go ahead, grab that port variable and use it here instead of 3000. Up at the very top of the file, I'd like you to make a constant called port. And this is going to store the port that we're going to use for the app. Now, the first thing we're going to do is grab a port from process.env. Process.env is an object that stores all of our environment variables as key value pairs. We're looking for one that Heroku is going to set called port. Awesome. This is going to work great for Heroku, but when we run the app locally, the port environment variable is not going to exist. So we're going to go ahead and set a default using the OR operator right here. If process.env.port does not exist, we'll set port equal to 3000 instead. Excellent. Now we have an app that's configured to work with Heroku and to still run locally just like it did before. All we have to do is take the port variable and use that down below instead of 3000. Right here, I'm going to reference port, and down below inside of our message, I'm going to swap it out for template strings. I'll paste the old text back in, and now I can replace 3000 with the injected port variable, which is going to change over time. With this in place, we have now fixed the first problem with our app. And if I run node server from the terminal, like we did earlier, I'm still going to get the exact same message. Server is up on port 3000. So your app will still work locally as expected. Next up, we have to specify a script in package.json. Inside of package.json, you might have noticed we have a scripts object, and on there we have a test script. This gets set by default for NPM. We can create all sorts of scripts inside of here that do whatever we like. A script is nothing more than a command that we run from the terminal. So I could take this command, node server.js, and turn it into a script instead. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Right here, we're going to go ahead and add a new script. The script needs to be called start. This is a very specific built-in script, and we're going to set it equal to the command that starts our app. In this case, it's going to be node space server.js. This is necessary because when Heroku tries to start our app, it's not going to run node with your file name because it doesn't know what your file name is called. Instead, it's going to run the start script, and the start script will be responsible for doing the proper thing. In this case, booting up that server file. Now we can run our app using that start script from the terminal by using npm start, just like this. When I do that, we get a little output related to npm, and then we get server is up on port 3000. And if we visit the app in the browser, everything works exactly as it did before. The big difference is that we are now ready for Heroku. We could also run the test script using from the terminal, npm test. This is something that we'll be doing a little later in the course. For now, we have no tests specified, and that is expected. The next step in the process is going to be to make that commit, and then we can finally start getting it up on the web. From the terminal, we're going to use some of those git commands we explored earlier in this section. First up, git status. When I run git status, we have something a little new. Instead of new files, we have modified files. Here, we have a modified package.json file, and we have a modified server.js file. These are not going to be committed if we were to run git commit just yet. We still have to use git add, and what we're going to do is run git add with the dot as the next argument. Dot is going to add every single thing showing up in git status to the next commit. Now, I only recommend using this syntax if everything you have listed here are things you actually want to commit. And in our case, that is indeed what we want. If I run git add and then rerun git status, I can now see what is going to be committed next under the changes to be committed header. Here we have our package.json file and the server.js file. Now we can go ahead and make that commit. I'm going to run git commit with the M flag so we can specify our message. And a good message for this commit would be something like setup, start script, and Heroku port. Excellent. And now we can go ahead and run that command, which is going to make the commit. And now we can go ahead and push that up to GitHub using git push. And we can leave off the origin remote because the origin is the default remote. I'm going to go ahead and run git push. This is going to push it up to GitHub, and now we are ready to actually create the app, push our code up, and view it over in the browser. The next step in the process is going to be to run a command called Heroku create from the terminal. Heroku create needs to get executed from inside of your application, just like we run our git commands. When I run Heroku create, a couple things are going to happen. First up, it's going to make a real new application over in the Heroku web app. It's also going to add a new remote to your Git repository. Now remember, we have an origin remote, which points to our GitHub repository. We're going to have a Heroku remote, which points to our Heroku Git repository. When we deploy to the Heroku Git repository, Heroku is going to see that, it's going to take the changes, and it's going to deploy them to the web. When we run Heroku create, all of that happens. Now we do still have to push up to this URL in order to actually do the deploying process, and we can do that using git push followed by Heroku, the brand new remote that was just added because we ran Heroku create. Now pushing this time around is going to go through the normal process, and then you're going to start seeing some logs. And these are logs coming back from Heroku letting you know how your app is deploying. It's going through the entire process, showing you what happens along the way. As you can see, that took about 10 seconds, and at the very end, we have some success messages. The app was launched successfully right here. It also verified that the app was deployed successfully, and that did indeed pass. From here, we actually have a URL we can visit. The URL is right here. We can take it, copy it, and paste it in the browser. What I'm going to do instead is use a command, Heroku open. Heroku open is going to open up the Heroku app in the default browser. When I run this, it's going to switch over to Chrome, and right here we get our application showing up just as expected. I can switch between pages and everything works just like it did locally. Now we have a URL, and this URL was given to us by Heroku. This is the default way Heroku generates app URLs. If you have your own domain registration company, you can go ahead and configure its DNS to point to this application. This is going to let you use a custom URL for your Heroku app. You'll have to refer to the specific instructions for your domain registrar in order to do that, but it can indeed be done. Now that we have this in place, we have successfully deployed our Node applications live to Heroku, and this is just fantastic. In order to do this, all we had to do was make a commit to change our code and push it up to a new Git remote. It could not be easier to deploy our code. You can also manage your application by going back over to the Heroku dashboard. If you give it a refresh, you should see that brand new URL somewhere down below. Remember, mine was Sleepy Retreat. Yours is going to be something else. If I scroll down, I have Sleepy Retreat right here. I can click it and I can view the app page. Here we can do a lot of configuration. We can manage the activity and access so we can collaborate with others. We have metrics, we have resources, all sorts of really cool stuff. With this in place, we are now done with our basic deploying video. In the next video, your challenge is going to be to go through that process again. You're going to add some changes to the Node app. You're going to commit them, deploy them, and view them live in the web. That's all coming up next, so stay tuned. I will see you next time.